Ladies and gentlemen, today we're here to talk about C.C.A. But first of all, we're going to talk about fish first. This will give you an idea of how we got here and what we're doing and why C.C.A. is in the Pacific Northwest. Back in 1988, I fished the North Fork of the Lewis River, started G. Loomis in 1982, and by 1988 we was fishing in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, 365 days a year almost. During the summer of 1988, we caught 1,700 summer run steelhead. 1989, we caught 900, and 1990, we caught 38. We fished as hard for 38 as we did for the 1,700 or the 900. The following year, we didn't fish so hard, but we only got 5. I got to tell you, in 1990, our fishing in the Pacific Northwest collapsed, especially on the North Fork. Our spring Chinook collapsed, our fall Chinook collapsed, our steelhead collapsed, our early and late coho collapsed. It just went in the sewer. So being a good sport fisherman like we all are, that we worry about our river, our stretch of river, our fish, our rock, my fish, we sat around till 1995 and did nothing about it. In 1995, the fish still weren't back, so we all got together and said, where did they go? How can we recover them? What's the problem? So we wanted to start a group that had direct results with the fish. I'd been with enough different groups that we accomplished nothing besides going fishing a couple times. The politics that we got into at that time was so low that we did nothing. They'd already made up their mind what they was going to do before we ever got there to talk about it. So anyway, we started Fish First. There was 5 of us. We researched it, came up with a whole bunch of things. We knew we had to partner with Fish and Wildlife. We went to Fish and Wildlife with this big long line of things. And Fish and Wildlife said, no, 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 no. But they did say 2 things. The 2 things that they let us do, we wanted to do 50% for hatchery fish, 50% for wild and native fish. So they gave us, the first thing they gave us was net pens. And net pens was a problem at that particular time because they used to raise the fish in the hatchery to a fry area size and then plant them in our upper rivers, billions of them. Well, what they had found out is planting these fry in these upper rivers with the over-harvesting that we've had since 1964 to the days that they started the hatchery, as we depleted the number of fish that were spawning because we was over-harvesting them, we was leaving less and less nutrients in the upper river. And when we put a lot of these billions of mouths up there to feed, there wasn't enough feed, so they was competing with the wild and native fish, competing with each other, and the results of the fish out to the fish back were very low. So what they decided in the late 80s, early 90s, that what they would do is raise the fish in the hatchery until it was just ready to smolt and go to the ocean. Then they would release it. It would go to the ocean, come back. They got a higher percentage to return, and they didn't put all the pressure on the wild and native fish. The problem with that is they had the same size ponds, so as they raised them from this area, it wasn't overcrowded. They raised them to this length, they overcrowded it, so Mother Nature says, we got too many fish in the pond, they throw a disease on it. We would throw a chemical on it, they'd throw a disease on it, and pretty soon the fish weren't any good at all. So with our net pens that we put into the rivers, we would take half of the fish out of the hatchery, put them in our net pens. When they got to about the size that they was beginning to get overcrowded, it took us 3 or 4 years, but we got rid of all of the diseases, and now we're releasing a very good fish, and we really have a very good return survival rate of our smolt. The other thing we did is we wanted to do half for wild and native fish. So they had put a dam 8 miles above back in the 30s, and no ladder on it. So the only part that we had left in the Lewis River drainage area was Cedar Creek, which is about a 30-mile long creek, which was the brood stream for the Cedar Creek hatchery at the time that they put the hatchery and the dam in, and it was full of fish in those days. So we asked for that, and they said, well, you don't want that. The water's too warm. It has no habitat. It has no fish. It has no nutrients. It has 2 dairies on it and all this type of stuff. And I said, well, if it's that bad, we can't hurt it any. Let us have it. So I think we was the very first group in Pacific Northwest was ever given a stream because it was so poor that they didn't think we could hurt it any. There is a little trap on it about 3 miles up from the mouth, and they had opened it up in 1992, didn't even keep track of it anymore. There was only 32 silvers left in the whole creek. And remember, this was the brood stream for the North Fork of the Lewis River. And so they just let it go. So they gave it to us in 1995. So we started doing all different type of restoration in this creek. We did egg boxes. We put nutrients in. We started out with like 50 a year. We worked our way up to 15,000 to 17,000 dead salmon carcasses to build a nutrient backup so we would have a better egg to smolt ratio. And the better egg to smolt ratio you have, it's like if you multiply something times 2 every year, you get 4. If you multiply it times 15 every year, then you get a much, much higher number. So if we have more smolt going out per the number of eggs that are in the gravel, we can do recovery much, much faster. And our biggest problem is in all of our streams, we have about a 3% nutrient load, which is, like I said, is just survival is about all of it is. So we worked this thing from 11 years, from 1995 to I think it was 2005. We had put all this nutrients in, all this egg boxes. We did about 9 miles of in-stream restoration, making riffle to pond ratio, which turns around and supports more of the fish. In 2002, we had taken it, like I said, from 32 fish to 16,250 fish. And it's quite remarkable. It's never been done any place that I know of in the Pacific Northwest, or maybe even in the world. We turned around and kept it up from 2004 to 14,540. So it wasn't a spike year, it was a good year. So it ended up that we had projected that the following year we was going to get 30,000. But the hatchery said that they was only going to get 5,000 on the early run. There's an early run that comes into the hatchery and a late run that comes into the streams. The reason is that's during the fall. And what ends up happening is a lot of times we do not have a good freshet that raises the water in these small creeks. Things 40% of our fish spawn in creeks that are dry 4 months out of the summer. They stay out in the ocean and out in the Columbia until we get that first freshet that then they come right on in and spawn. So the early ones come in earlier, come into the hatchery because there's lots of water. Well, seeing that they said there's only going to get 5,000 back, we reduced ours from 30,000 down to 20,000. Well, all of a sudden, they got 5 back to the hatchery, they got 10 back to the hatchery, they got 15, they got 20. By the time they got 20,000 back to the hatchery, they said, we should have had a gill net season in the Columbia River on these fish. So they opened up a gill net season. They opened up a gill net season that they called it cleanup. And by the time that they opened the season up, 32,000 came back to the hatchery, and the fish that were left in the river was ours, and instead of 20 to 30,000, we got back 6,100. Now they said, well, we didn't do it. Well, I'd like to know what happened, because in 11 years, all of the charts from the hatchery fish to our wild fish were kind of in the same area, except for that year, their went up and ours went down. Now, I always play this. Anybody a duck hunter? Duck hunter, okay. How many bald eagles did you get for incidental kill last year on your duck limit? None. Okay, so let's just say that you had an incidental of 2, but you didn't shoot any. Would you ask for 5 for the following year? Probably not very likely. Now these fish here are on the endangered species list in the lower Columbia River. They have, the commercial fisherman has an incidental kill of 20%. So when they're trying to net the hatchery fish, they are allowed to kill 20% of an endangered species. I mean, we were never given any for any endangered species that I know of. But they was given 20. The following year after this, they put in and asked for an additional 30% more of the listed fish. Now, if they hadn't caught over their 20%, why would they put in the following year for an additional 30? Doesn't make sense. But this is the kind of information that we get back from them. It just doesn't matter. It's not their fault. So let's take a look at what we've talked about for the last 25 years. The last 25 years, this is the 4 things that they have blamed on the decline of our Pacific Northwest salmon: hydro, habitat, hatcheries, and harvest. In that column, I mean, it's always hydro first and it's habitat, because hatcheries and harvest go together. So if it's not hydro, it's got to be habitat. So this is how they've always taken it. So what we'll do is we'll go to hydro, and we'll go to the 4 Snake River dams. How many of you have read 1 to 3 or 4 articles about the 4 Snake River dams, taking them out because they're the problem with the Pacific Northwest salmon? In fact, that's what 60 Minutes said, was they brought to our attention the devastation of the Pacific Northwest salmon and went right into the 4 Snake River dams of being the problem. So whether you believed it or didn't believe it, this is what they're saying is happening, because this is where we spent billions and billions of dollars. So I'd say you guys have probably read 1 to 5 different things. Okay, so let's take a look at that, and let's how many of you believe that there's less salmon going up the Snake River today than there was before they put the dams in? And let's take a guess of it. Do you think there's half as many, 1/4, 1/8, or less than 1/60th? Less than 1/60th? I did this for 53 outdoor riders here about a month and a half ago. 2 of them said less than 1/60th before I got it out of my mouth, and they all agreed that they wrote 1 to 5 articles, and it's the problem. I said, what if I told you that there's not less than half, not less than 1/4, not less than 1/8, not less than 1/60th the fish? There's actually 2.5 times more salmon going over those 4 Snake River dams, and 6.5 times more steelhead. What they wanted to know is where did you get the numbers? Well, it's easy to get the numbers. You can go home tonight and get the numbers. You look up the Snake River, you look up those 4 dams, and you look up the first year that they put those dams in, and the first year that they put those dams in, those fish for the first 3 years were out in the ocean, growing up, and were not affected by the dams. They came down before the dams were put in. They're out in the ocean growing up. They just came back, and there's the dams. So here's your numbers. This is the Ice Harbor Dam. The one in the front is what was in it the first 3 years that they put the dam in. And the blue one is what was in it from 2002 to 2005. We averaged them out so that we had 3 years, so we didn't have a spike or a low deal. So this is a pretty good average of what there was in it. So here's your Lower Monument Dam, here's your Little Goose Dam, and here's your Lower Granite Dam. I mean, there's more fish going over it. Now, I'm not here to tell you that dams are good for fish. They're not. Absolutely not. Dams are not good for fish. But if we keep blaming a problem that's not the problem, we'll never recover it. We put millions and millions and millions of dollars. No, that's not right. I'm sorry. Billions and billions and billions of dollars into this problem, and we have nothing for it. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out we're spending our money in the wrong place. Not that the dams aren't a problem. They are, but they're not the problem. When I started this out and I said 3 damn questions, it was probably ended up being correct both ways around. Why are there more fish passing the Snake River dams today than the first 3 years after construction? Pretty good question. Well, the answer is spending this billions and billions of dollars on the Snake River dams, the mitigation that we have put out is astronomical. We've got 3 or 4 times as many hatcheries on the Snake Rivers to mitigate against the dams killing all these fish. But folks, you got to remember, all these fish go out into the big bula basin of the Pacific Ocean, and this is where they get harvested. So I don't care where it comes into that, the more that comes in one way, gets stirred up in that Pacific Ocean and gets harvested, the more will come back to the area that they came from. It's just nothing but numbers. Why aren't we focusing on dams that don't have ladders? I mean, these 4 have ladders. These fish can get up over the dams, get up into what spawning ground is left up there. But it's not about, folks, it's not about taking out these dams. Or I should say, it's not about the fish. It's about taking out the dams. The environmentalists want the dams out. They want these 4 dams out first because they're the lowest power on the power grid, and they just want the dams out. But it has nothing to do with the fish. Here's another one. Exactly how many coal plants are we prepared to build to replace hydropower? I mean, you people know that the biggest producer of greenhouse gases in the world, coal and oil-driven power plants. I don't care if you're talking about China, if you're talking about every place else, the most greenhouse gases. To take these out would have to build probably 5 or 6 or 7 more power plants to replace that electricity. It's criminally insane what we're trying to do there. In 13 years, we've spent $19 billion. We have no recovery at all. Is that a good investment? What is the single biggest improvement that we can do for the habitat? Habitat was number 2. We talked about hydro. We're going to talk about habitat. We spend billions of these dollars are for habitat, okay, to improve the habitat for better spawning. Today, folks, we're harvesting about 450 million anatomous fish in the Pacific Ocean. When these fish start back their cycle back down to our Pacific Northwest, they go by Alaska. Alaska harvested 212 million salmon in 2007. They come by Canada. Canada harvests them. They come off of our coast. Today, we've got 6 times the number of trawlers off the coast of Washington than we've had for 10 years, harvesting them. And then when they get in the Columbia River, we gill net them. Out of all of that harvest, we do not have one piece of selective harvest gear. When we talk about recovery, we only talk about the wild and native fish that started this whole thing, that probably has produced more fish for harvest than all of our hatcheries combined. But we've done nothing for them but harvest them for 140 years. We have them in such a low percentage that they really can't add much to harvest. But they're the only thing that can add to recovery. And yet we have no selective harvest to let them go up and use this billions and billions of dollars worth of habitat that we're putting in for them. It's criminally insane. That right there is the most important thing to habitat, and we're doing none of it other than what we've done in Cedar Creek. You've got to understand that the life cycle of this salmon is different than any other fish in the world. I mean, you know, I don't believe anything in this world when us man came here was an accident. It was always a purpose. The salmon is different than any other fish in the entire world, but it also needs to spawn in an area that's different than any other place in the world for the area that it is in the world. Coming out of the Cascades and the Rocky Mountains, in 3 days the water is out in the ocean. It has no time to build nutrients. So how do we get billions of fish spawning and living in an area where there's not enough nutrients to feed them? Somebody made a fish that will go out into the ocean and live for 3 to 5 years, 6 years, build up carbon and stuff out of the ocean, take it up the river and spawn and die and have an enzyme in it that breaks it down in 2 months. So when the babies come out of the gravel, this is all the biomass to feed them. I mean, there's no other fish in the world that's ever been set up this way. And so without the nutrients in the upper watershed, our egg to smolt ratio that we talked about before is in the toilet, about 3% unless we do it. Today, we have millions of fish that are excess fish